I hope the breakout sessions went well. I was in this room, and I hope things went well in the adjoining room this morning. Welcome back to session 6 and the start of our second full day of festivities here at the Greater Northwest Passenger Rail Summit in beautiful Billings, Montana. I'm Dave Strohmeyer, chair of the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority. I want to start out with a few announcements before we dive right into this session, talking about the Section 22214 study routes. And let's just begin by a shout out to Walt with the Northern Hotel. He's provided serious support for us for this event. And thanks to the Northern staff for all that they do, both in providing meals, room setup, and everything to help make this event possible. I'll draw your attention yet again to the Nerve Center over here in the corner. Over here we have both Violet and Kyla from Missoula County. We also have from Community 7 TV, Tim and Lindsay. From DIA Events, Jonathan. This event would not be going nearly as smoothly as it is without them. So a round of applause for these folks over here. It would go even smoother if the airline industry pulled through for our guests who we've had innumerable challenges with, but that's a different story. So our planning committee, I believe Jason Stewart mentioned yesterday that we have a full-blown planning committee that's been working on this event for many months, and this comprises representatives from across this greater Northwest region: Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, Montana, Idaho, Utah, Oregon, and Washington, and Colorado. Their efforts have been dedicated and continuous over months, and we thank them for their efforts. So the Planning Committee. And if you want to just hold your applause for a moment, I'll run through a whole laundry list of folks to recognize, and we can recognize them with our applause at the end. Presenters and moderators for this event, you've done a great job. We thank you for your effort and energy that you've brought to the table. To all of you, our attendees, both in the room here in Billings, Montana, and virtually, you are and have made this a great event, and I think we'll all benefit from both the knowledge that we will be taking away from this, but also the energy and sense of mission as far as what we have to accomplish by way of next steps. We do have representatives from our host railroads throughout this region: Montana Rail Link, BNSF, and Union Pacific joining us. We thank them for their participation. I, in advance, thank the staff out at the depot who will be hosting us tonight for our gala dinner, and the sponsors of this event, which are many. Our financial sponsors include Jacobs, Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority, HDR, Aperco, Clearwater Credit Union, All Aboard Washington, BNSF Railway, DJ&A, Northwestern Energy, Quandel, the City of Boise, Idaho, Montana Rail Link, Dorsey and Whitney, the Utah Rail Passengers Association, Aorta, KLJ, David Evans and Associates, Compass, which is Community Planning Associates of Southwest Idaho, Siemens, Mountain Line, the Missoula MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, First Interstate Bank, Granite Peak Environmental, and also in-kind contributions from All Aboard Northwest and CHCS Internet Development. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Let's give them a round of applause. So one big announcement that I want to get out in front of you, and in the spirit of keeping things lively and also a little bit unpredictable, which a bit of that is always good, at our noon lunch hour. And this will be starting and queuing up here at 12:15 sharp. So you'll want to, after that last session before lunch, which would be session 8, get your lunch over there in the buffet line, get yourself back over here at 12:15. If technology pulls through, we will be joined by the CEO of Ukrainian Railways, Alexander Kamyshin, and this will be a special treat for us, and I think fits in with the theme of we can do this, folks. If the adversity that is being experienced in Ukraine as we speak during a time of war, adapting to challenges relative to movement on rail lines can be achieved there. Surely that is an inspiration for us in the United States to deviate from what sometimes is a bad habit of hand-wringing to figuring out how to solve problems and solutions and come up with solutions. So be here for that. This is going to be a special treat for us, and that will also be followed by a pre-recorded statement from Representative Peter DeFazio. The one last announcement before we get rolling here that I want to bring up is if any of you are still interested in attending the gala dinner tonight, we do have a few extra place settings that we have reserved. So if you didn't think you would originally be available to participate in that event, but you are now, please hit up Kyla, Violet, or Chad during one of the breaks, and we'll see what we can make happen for you. This section of the summit, if we're to use a metaphor from music, might be seen as the bridge. We've had a lot of information presented to you, a lot of time devoted to panel discussion, and not a lot of white space, if you will, not a whole lot of opportunity for exchange of ideas with the attendees here. We certainly have had some. The last breakout sessions had a little bit more, but we intend this as an opportunity to really zero in on and hear from you as far as what I see at least is the center of gravity for this event and the catalyst for what we are talking about today, and that is the bipartisan infrastructure law and what that means for next steps of motivating our efforts forward. So in particular, this section that we're talking about, section 22214, which is about as unsexy a title as I can imagine, is focused on a nationwide study of looking at discontinued Amtrak routes. The Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority and other partners played a key role in getting language into this that addressed what we think are some of our regional and national needs. And this was an effort, a bipartisan effort of U.S. Senators John Tester and Mississippi Senator Roger Wicker out of Mississippi to get this through Senate Commerce and over the finish line. I'm just going to read through some of the factors that will be considered during this study, during this analysis for expansion of the national network, restoration, potential restoration of lines. And then also talk a little bit about the consultation process, and then turn it over to Boise City Council President Elaine Clegg to talk a little bit about her experience in Boise and advocacy for the Pioneer Route. And then I'll open it up to all of you. We have a blank flip chart up here, so very literally white space at the front of the room to try to collect folks' ideas as far as what you think we can feed directly into this study, particularly on the stakeholder engagement front. And is there anyone from FRA still here? Yes, okay. I'm glad you're in the room with us. So one of the things that we will be looking to you to clarify for us, and I hope you don't mind if we end up putting you just impromptu on the spot here at some point, but will be what is it that we can garner from this room today to hand off to the consultant and the consulting team that they will be hiring any day now to conduct this study, which is going to be a compressed time frame over the next 14 months to deliver a report to Congress with recommendations on which long-distance routes to restore. So to get right to it, factors when considering expansions. Number 1, link and serve large and small communities as part of a regional rail network. Number 2, advance the economic and social well-being of rural areas of the United States. Number 3, provide enhanced connectivity for the national long-distance passenger rail system. Number 4, reflect public engagement and local and regional support for restored passenger rail service. I'm going to read this one again. This is maybe one of the most critical ones for those of us assembled here today. Reflect public engagement and local and regional support for restored passenger rail service. Specifically the lines we're talking about, North Coast Hiawatha / North Coast Limited and the Pioneer Route. Consultation. So what does that engagement process look? What does consultation with stakeholders look like? So there's a list of 8 possible entities to consult with as part of this study and analysis. Number 1, Amtrak, no-brainer. Number 2, each state along a relevant route. State MDTs need to be part of the engagement process. Number 3, regional transportation planning organizations and metropolitan planning organizations, municipalities and communities along those relevant routes to be selected by the Secretary. Host railroad carriers, the tracks of which may be used for a service described in the foregoing section. Organizations representing onboard Amtrak employees. Nonprofit organizations representing Amtrak passengers. Relevant regional passenger rail authorities. I wonder who wrote that. And federally recognized Indian tribes and such other entities as the Secretary may select. Hold those thoughts because that really is going to be the focus of what we want some input back on today in terms of who ought to be consulted, who ought to be engaged, and what that engagement process may look like, because the communities that folks represent in this room are not monolithic in the types of communities you represent. It goes all the way from large metropolitan communities throughout this greater Northwest region to some of the smallest, most rural locales and communities and cities and towns in this region. So with that, President Clegg.
Number 4, turn that one on. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Well, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. This has been maybe the most fun thing I've done over the last 2 years. I don't know about the rest of you, but COVID was quite a challenge for me, and being able to work on trains was one of the highlights. I also started a tree initiative during this, so my mantra has been trains and trees, and people love them both, and it's really fun to work on them. So I want to thank some folks from Idaho who are here. First of all, the Boise City staff who've been supporting me. I wouldn't have been able to do any of the work that I've been doing without them. Thank you. We have from our Regional Transit Authority, the Planning Operations Manager, or I probably have messed up Stephen's name, but really excited to have him. And when we get to writing down who else should be consulted, I believe that regional transit authorities should certainly be on that list because they're going to be really important to this. And then finally, I want to recognize the mayor of one of our cities in our region, Jerem Wagner. Thank you for coming up here. Caldwell will be one of the stops on our line, one of the very important stops on our line. It's really important that the municipalities have been part of this. And do I put up the map or can you get it started? So what we're talking about is really restoring service to, so this is the other map. There we go. Service to a part of the country that got left out when Amtrak took over. And I know the North Coast Hiawatha has a similar story, but in 1925, the depot opened in Boise. 3,000 people showed up. And the Portland Rose came through. The Portland Rose went from Portland to Salt Lake, came through Boise 3 times a day, was well-traveled all the way through the 60s and into the 70s when UP decided they couldn't do it anymore. And when Amtrak took over, it became really poor service. And not surprisingly, it wasn't ridden very much or very well. And ultimately, it became 2 or 3 times a week, and then finally was abandoned in 1997. Our region is aging. It's a region that has a lot of mountains around it. To get to Boise in the winter, you have to drive over a mountain pass from almost anywhere. And my husband and I have 2 kids in Seattle. We drive that a couple of times a year, usually at least once in the winter, and it's getting really hard to drive. Last time we were on it, we saw 3 multi-car crashes. We almost got hit, and it's just not something I want to do in the winter anymore. There's a lot of people in our region like me, so all of the other things aside, all of the things we've talked about, equity, which is incredibly important, the destinations like the VA hospitals, the universities, all of that aside, we are an aging population in a region of the country that doesn't have any other transportation choices and has hard winters. So for no other reason, I think these 2 lines desperately need to be restored. With that, I'm going to turn it over to all of you to start talking about what is it we want FRA to hear as we talk about restoring these lines to better service, to new service, and hopefully to better service than what they had in the last few years of their lives.
Okay, the floor is open. Okay.
So the dotted line here, in this one is the old Pioneer, whoops. And in one of them we have there, in that one is the North Coast Hiawatha. Those are the 2 lines we're really focusing on today. This one and this one.
So Dave, to address your question about who do we consult with, the outreach, I think one of the most important ones that you mentioned was the metropolitan planning organizations that are along these 2 routes. These metropolitan planning organizations represent constituencies of, many of them are small cities. In the case of the Yakima Valley Conference of Governments, they represent 13 different cities up and down the valley. In the case of the Benton Franklin Council of Governments, which is around the Tri-Cities area, they represent a similar number of smaller cities. All of these would be interested, and I think the key to getting the input from these smaller cities is through the metropolitan planning organizations, and there's got to be meetings with them to get their input.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point, Gary. So if we're looking, since we are currently located in the state of Montana, looking here in Montana, we've got 2 MPOs currently. Missoula, Billings will likely have a 3rd, well, actually we do have a 3rd one, Great Falls, which is not along the North Coast Hiawatha route, but we'll likely have a 4th by way of Bozeman soon. Looking to the east, we've got Bismarck, Mandan, and Fargo, Moorhead, and I think we could also connect the dots along the Pioneer route also. So great point, MPOs.
So Compass, who is one of our sponsors today, is the MPO in the Boise region, 16 cities, 2 counties, planning area of 10 counties, so certainly very important. We're adding a new MPO in the Twin Falls region, which is right in the middle of the state, and Pocatello also has a planning organization, the Bannock Transportation Planning Organization. They, as well as the city of Pocatello and the city of Chubbuck, have been supportive of this. So in Idaho, those will be really important as well. I would add this. In Washington state, there are rural planning associations organized by the state DOT. Oregon does planning for the rural areas. In Idaho, we have an organization called the Local Highway Technical Assistance Council. And it's focused on highways, as his name says, but I think as time goes on, and if our DOT does adopt rail, hopefully their mission will expand. I don't know what in Utah and Montana the rural areas are represented by, but I think it's important not to leave those out. So for instance, in our state, the city of Shoshone will be an important stop, and it is not part of an MPO.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks, Dave. I'm James Holbrook. I'm the Executive Secretary for the Montana State AFL-CIO. Other entities that you're going to want to reach out to would be the SMART Union. That's the Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers. IBEW. I'll let you catch up on that. That's a lot of acronyms. IBEW is the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and the Teamsters, who represent the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers. So a lot of these jobs will be great union paying jobs, and the folks that work in those industries probably have a lot of doors already open for what you're working on, so good to reach out to them.
Thank you.
And just a question for the union folks, do those unions also represent the workers on the Amtrak trains or the other trains? So, you know, there are a lot of workers on those trains. They cook the food, they take care of the trains. Is there, which union represents them?
I honestly can't answer that question off the top of my head. I don't come from that industry, but I'll give you my contact information and I'll find out for you for sure. So.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, great.
Okay. Oh, we'll get that. Okay.
More work to be done there to make sure we don't leave anyone out, but yeah, labor has absolutely got to be at the table. Oh, Randy.
Randy Graberger with Quandl Consultants, formerly with the Colorado Rail Commission. When we were really initiating the stakeholder engagement in Colorado, we found out that the universities and college systems up and down the Front Range were head over heels in favor of passenger rail. One, they don't want all these kids bringing their cars onto campus. That's a big issue. And two, a lot of the kids don't want to drive anyway. They'd rather be on their phones or sleeping or whatever, instead of having to drive I-25 to get to college. So I'm sure that applies to both of these routes as well.
It does. For
kids
those of
these
you who were
days.
not in this room during the breakouts, I told the story of realizing that the University of Idaho used to have a student special that went from Boise up to the university, and lots of students wrote it. So yeah, I think that's a really important one.
My name's Jeff Broderick, and I would encourage the FRA to award bonus points for proposed projects where there is demonstrated cooperation between DOTs to make sure that corridors don't end at state lines. A large state like California has some very robust intrastate corridors, but they also have a huge population and are a large geographic area. But in the Northwest, we have ODOT and WashDOT cooperating. If there's going to be a train across the northern tier, then Washington, Idaho, Montana, the Dakotas will need to cooperate. So I think interstate cooperation should be encouraged, and there should be some kind of inducement to do that. And to touch on your comment about serving colleges and universities or working with colleges and universities, I know Eastern Oregon University in La Grande, it's having trouble attracting students, but it's also a very remote community that is not well served by public transit of any kind. And so reliable intercity rail service could help that university, but I know they're not the only university that is in that situation.
Those communities in Eastern Oregon also have community colleges. So LeGrand has the university, but Pendleton and Baker both have community colleges, and both of those could be well served.
I'm going to put
Ontario
FRA
as
on
well.
on the hot seat here before we go any farther. So we want to make sure that you all and your contractor gets as sharp and pointed of information is going to be useful as possible. So what we're talking about right here, obviously, stakeholder engagement. Any specific aspect of stakeholder engagement that you are particularly interested in that needs to be handed off to that contractor so they can hit the ground running?
Oh, you're so sweet.
Sure, this is not necessarily what, we can't say what will be handed off or what will be given to a contractor, but, in general, in the big picture, this conversation right here is really helpful, or folks point out what is, the best possible ways to reach some of the stakeholders identified in the infrastructure bill. And I think it's probably also really helpful for people to think about what, the goals, principles, and outcomes of stakeholder engagement should be in the study. So both the kind of on-the-ground aspects, making sure that we know that folks know that MPOs are a good way to reach smaller communities, but also, as you think about it, what should the role of stakeholder engagement be? What should the goals be for the study?
Okay, goals of stakeholder engagement. I've got Karen over here, then I'll come back.
I've got one.
Oh, you got one. Okay,
Already got
very good.
Mike, thanks. What I would encourage you to really think about is bipartisanship. There is nothing that can kill a project faster than an election. And when I was at FRA, I learned that the hard way. We gave money out to the state of Florida, and the new governor killed it. We did the same for Wisconsin, and the governor killed it. Bipartisanship is something that actually flourishes in the West, particularly with respect to transportation. So keep your eye on that. Make sure you've got support, very strong support from both sides of the aisle that can survive the next election. These are long-term efforts.
Thank you, that's really important.
Thanks,
I would mention, Dave mentioned that Senator Tester and Senator Wicker were involved in the negotiations, and they were bipartisan. In addition, Senator Crapo from Idaho and Senator Manchin from West Virginia, who are also bipartisan, were in the background pushing those along. So this bill wouldn't have happened without that. I think it's a really important point.
Bruce.
Bruce Agnew with Pacific Northwest Economic Region. I mentioned this briefly in the panel yesterday, but picking up on Karen's comment about bipartisanship, I mean, obviously you need cooperation with the freight railroads and industry and agriculture and mining, et cetera, and we're going to talk about that in the next panel. But it seems to me, in terms of intergovernmental lobbying to get our fair share of Amtrak and BIL and now IRA money, you need to go on 4 levels. You talked about, well, you're a good example. You're a president of a city council, MPOs. Every state legislature, and I'm sitting next to the chair of the Montana's Transportation Committee, needs a bipartisan state rail caucus. Urban and rural, that's where the state rail caucus come together on issues that there may be disagreement on other transportation priorities. At the governor's level, you have a great resource, Western governors, Denver West, they're all committed to climate change. They're all talking about electric highways and all kinds of carbon reduction, zero emission. Well, trains are carbon reduction. And so hit on that climate change, get the Western governors. They tend to be more bipartisan than the national associations. And then finally, reference was made again, powerful congressional representations. Now, our Pinward region includes Alaska, which has Senator Murkowski and carries a lot of political weight. But you've got Mitt Romney in Utah, you've got Crapo, Dates, Patty Murray, Maria Cantwell, Ron Wyden, DeFazio, you're going to hear from. If you just do a matrix of members of Congress on authorizing appropriations and regulatory committees, energy and commerce, et cetera, you've got a powerful coalition that needs to get the message, we want our fair share.
Good point.
Thank you.
We also have some appropriators.
Okay, we'll come back to you in a second. Right here, Gordon.
Yeah, I think to go along with that point, we have the Montana Association of Counties. I'm Gordon Oakers, I'm a county commissioner. So we have the Montana Association of Counties and we have the National Association of Counties. Both groups more at the grassroots levels. So that's the next level lower, I guess, or however you want to say it, or up, whatever.
No, that's a great point. So if any of your states have.
There's also municipal leagues.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have the Montana League of Cities and Towns, so if any of your states have something similar, they would be worth rolling into the engagement process. I think I saw a hand back here farther, maybe it was just you, Dan. Okay, not just you, but.
Okay, so I think that we need to have as much active engagement with the as many of the tribal governments along the lengths of both lines. And Dave has provided leadership in Montana and from the very beginning, reached out to the tribes affected by the North Coast Hiawatha within the state of Montana. And I've had wonderful representation yesterday, and Martin is here, and from the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribe, and that is really important to us. It needs to be important in every state along the line. Look at the Explorer map out in the other room, and you can find the major reservations, and there are many more smaller ones that are not listed there, and we need to find some way of having consultation across the region with as many of the tribal governments as possible as to how their communities and their people can be reconnected with their ancestral homelands and the opportunities in it. And so, anyway, it needs to go along both lines everywhere.
So one of the things I thought about yesterday as the tribal members were talking, much of the Pioneer Line follows either the Snake River or the Columbia River. In addition to the tribes, and I've talked to them, especially on the Columbia, really important factor are the fish that have been so impacted by climate change, but also by roadways, and the rubber tire dust from roadways getting into the rivers and really making it more difficult for fish. So I think there's a real coalition, not just between tribal members, but also the environmental interests that follow those same values.
A lot of this is macro level, and it's fabulous. It's really, really important. But one aspect that I feel is often forgotten about is rather ironic, and that is present-day ridership. I know that we are contemplating routes that go to places that are not presently served by the national network, but Amtrak ridership is, I think, an astonishing resource that is not presently tapped. I have found that ridership modal choice, when actually queried from present-day passengers, is far more diverse and far more surprising than I've ever seen modeled. And I think that asking people that actually ride the trains today, and there's the self-selected advocacy groups, and they're important as well, but I think that actual surveyed passenger ridership is a tremendously overlooked subject, and there's millions of them every year.
Yeah, thanks, Abe. That's a great point. Okay, I think I saw some hands up in the middle over here a second ago. Okay, Barry.
Elaine, to follow up on your earlier question there, the Amtrak station agents and the onboard service crews are represented by the TCU, or the Transportation Communications Union, which is part of the IAM or the machinists group.
Thanks. Okay, we'll head back this direction.
Thank you. Margie McDonald from here in Billings, former state senator. I was taken by Governor Burgum's comment yesterday about the connections between these passenger rails and the national park system. We have a couple of the crown jewels, well, several, including Theodore Roosevelt, right along the line here. And I do think that there's a strong advocacy community around those national parks. And I think that's another interest group. And then in Billings, probably our largest single employee sector is healthcare. And the service area for the people who come to Billings for their health care is enormous. It goes out into South Dakota, far into North Dakota, all through central and eastern Montana and all over west. And I do think that they are major players in the Montana economy and in the Billings community, and I would like to talk to them about how they can serve their people better with this.
That's a really important point, and it's also true on the Pioneer Line. There's 2 VA hospitals on the line, one in Boise, one in Salt Lake. They're both pretty remote from anything else, so they certainly gather a lot of care. But in addition, the regional medical centers in both Salt Lake and Boise are of a size and quality that they attract care from all over the region, like a 400-mile radius in both cases. So I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, absolutely. A number of us met here not that long ago with the Veterans Administration over in Helena, Montana, and they were very interested in the ways in which passenger rail can not only provide service to veterans to get them to and from where they need to go at the very limited number of VA clinics in our region, but also their physicians and staff to get them to the outlying areas to make those visits, critical visits that they need to. Before we go on, one thing I wanted to just throw out there, we've been talking a lot about the possible stakeholders themselves, but be thinking about mode of communication, the kind of the framework of that engagement. I might want to hear from Dan Bilka here in just a second. There's been a lot of discussion over the past year as far as a regional working group of some sort, as a means to pull together stakeholders across the region, perhaps modeled after the Gulf Coast Working Group, maybe not identical. But this is something that the Secretary of Transportation is empowered to do as part of this study, and it might be something worth having on the table as a way, as a mechanism to engage folks. And I think we also heard it from the governor of North Dakota yesterday.
Before, go ahead, bring the mic up. One thing that I wanted to bring up, in addition to the VA hospitals in our region, our Air Force Base is very, very interested in getting service. There's an Air Force Base in Spokane. There's a variety of bases around the region, certainly one in Salt Lake. I don't know the ones in Montana as well. But that is a constituency that's having a really difficult time finding housing, finding transportation from wherever their housing is to the base, finding transportation from the base to the services that they and their families need. So I think they're another big constituency.
Margie beat me to it. I was going to mention the national parks also. You know, something like 12 million non-resident visitors visit Montana every year. 5 million visitors documented it in Yellowstone Park last year. 72% of those were documented at West Yellowstone, Gardner, or Silvergate. So the opportunity for rail to serve those entrances is pretty strong. And in fact, that's a lot of the driving force for rail in the first place back in the day. Fun story, maybe it can come back. There used to be savage trains. Yellowstone seasonal employees have historically been referred to as savages. And they used to start a savage train on the west coast, on the east coast. They would roll into Livingston and down to Gardner and then hop on buses and go into the park to go to work for the summer. So maybe we can bring some savage trains back.
Okay, be right to you there.
Thank you. It's always dangerous to give someone who's campaigning for Congress a microphone, but I just wanted to share. So my name is Penny Ronning, and I'm running for the United States House of Representatives here in Congressional District 2 in Montana, which is much of the rural part of Montana. And everything that was said yesterday could not have been more spot on from what I have been hearing from residents in those areas in Montana. But one of the things I wanted to share is I put 15,000 miles on my car since February. I've driven a lot of those roads we've been talking about and a lot of those highways, and I've had those dangerous situations. I've had those winter moments. I've had those moments of deer encounter, which is just terrifying. And I couldn't agree more with everything that's being said. But here's the deal, 15,000 miles in Montana. I'm driving in Montana. It's the most beautiful state in the country. That's not a bad gig. That's a good thing. And so one of the things I wanted to share is, Dave, you used the word sexy a little bit ago. And that's one of the things that I think is so important about bringing tourism, and you were just capitalizing on that, is that this is not just about the need we have, and we have a great need for this rail service, but these states that we're talking about are some of the most beautiful in our country, and people want to see it, and they want to see it by rail. And this is a great opportunity to bring that type of tourism back to our country. I used to live in Europe and used to live in Asia. That was my mode of transportation, was the rail. That's how I saw all those countries. This is an absolutely outstanding opportunity to bring that tourism back to this part of the country again. And just to share a little story, so in Billings, we had a naval ship that was named after us just a short time ago. And BNSF was a wonderful sponsor of a train trip that we got to do to raise funds for the USS Billings. And we were to go from passenger rail from Billings to Huntley. That's like about 40 miles. We didn't quite make it to Huntley because we had to turn around because there was some rail thing. But there were about 200 of us on that rail service, and we had the most outstanding passenger service on that little teeny tiny distance, and we were all taking pictures of each other on the train, taking pictures out the window, and it was an extraordinary experience. And that's what I would love to see us be able to capitalize on again, and bring that part of the economy back to this part of the country and really show what we've got here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Penny, and we've just got a few more minutes. You've had your hand up for a little while, and then we'll come over to Jim, and you might end up having the last word, Jim.
It never happens at home, I welcome. So, a lot of the discussion this morning has been on sort of the general process of doing these studies, and I'm wondering if you could say a few words specifically about the study that will be conducted on the Hiawatha, how it's being set up, what is its current progress, and so forth.
Okay, we talked about that a little bit yesterday, but Katie, could you give us the 45-second synopsis of that?
Sure. So the infrastructure bill directs DOT and FRA to study the Amtrak long-distance routes that have been discontinued, such as the Hiawatha, routes that don't operate daily, as well as potential new routes, paying attention to the routes that operated before 1971. And in terms of process, Congress has asked us to deliver a report by, I believe, November of 2023. And we are currently working to get a consultant on board who will help us really kind of hit the ground running, and in terms of doing the analysis of travel markets and roles that routes play in communities, as well as making sure we have really robust stakeholder engagement. So I would say that, you know, soon we'll have a much more like comprehensive kickoff. This is really an introduction to the broader study.
There's going to be a conference in September in Kansas City, and they're hoping to kick it off then.
So very soon. That's what I was hearing. Very soon. Okay. And tell you what we will also do. We will try to get some copies of the actual federal law, the section of the bipartisan infrastructure law placed on the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority table out here. So if you want to see what the actual law says, it's only a page and a half worth of text. Take a look at that, and that will be forthcoming. Jim, you're going to have the last word. Then we're going to have to wrap up. And also, great interchange here. I think what we might end up doing is putting a flip chart, this flip chart out in the foyer out here. So if folks have other ideas as far as engagement, stakeholders, put it up on there. We want to deliver this to FRA. Jim.
And I'll try to be terse and concise.
And perhaps our greatest champions are people we've overlooked, and those are employers. The contemporary workplace is a very different place than what it was 10 or 20 years ago. COVID has made, virtual work practical, but a lot of those people that work virtually are said, well, come to headquarters, 2 or 3 times a month for this meeting. Also, modern companies have locations everywhere, and you may be asked to go work someplace 1,000 miles away for 6 or 8 weeks or a year while we get their workload caught up, and you don't want to pull your families away from the homes they're in. So taking the train is a very attractive thing to do. Bruce is familiar with an employer in the Northwest that is everywhere all the time. And their employees are scattered everywhere and have to travel to get a simple job done.
Thank you. And before I forget, Montana's a beautiful state, as are the other states of this greater Northwest region, as is Canada and Alberta to our north. So let's not forget our friends to the north of us. I think we've run out of time, Elaine.
I think we have. When we put these out here, we'll try to get some markers of different colors, and if there's one you think is particularly important, put a little star by it. If there's a new one, write it down. Let's get as complete a list as we can to FRA of the things we think are important as they begin this study.
All right. Thanks, everyone. 10-minute break.